Hello, good afternoon. One of the interesting things about teaching tarot cards is that I find out things, or I make parallels, which I didn't really focus on before. I've been giving tarot card readings for about 40 years, and I very rarely give trainings. I'm doing one at the moment in the Ukraine, and of course then I try to find out, a bit more about it and do some more research. And one of the interesting things that I've discovered, which is 3 tarot decks, which I've been working with or playing with or using, have one parallel which I didn't really think about too much before. And they've all been painted by women. And I'd just like to say a little bit about that, because the first tarot deck I came across was called the Ryder Waite Deck. Ryder was the name of the publisher. Published it in 1910, by the way, which is over 100 years ago. And Waite was the name of the English gentleman who gave all the cards their esoteric description. And he was a product, in a way, of that huge, that intensely fashionable interest in Victorian times about the occult and esoteric philosophy and theosophy and India and meditation and all that kind of stuff. And that's so he was the visionary, in a way, or he was the intellectual, at least. He might not have been such a visionary. And a woman called Pamela Coleman Smith started having visions. She joined the Order of the Golden Dawn, which was one of those occult organizations, secret societies, which the Victorians loved and the post-Victorians. And so she joined, and she started having visions, and she was encouraged to paint the 72 cards to give a visual interpretation or visual expression to A.E. Waite's ideas about the tarot deck. And within a year, she really did an amazing job. Within a year, she had painted all 72 cards. And then she disappeared into obscurity. And when I first bought the Ryder Waite deck, which was 1974, I think, there was no mention of Pamela Coleman Smith at all. And just now, I just bought a new deck now because I'm giving this training, and I notice now there's a little card at the beginning with a photo of Pamela Coleman Smith and a little bit about her biography, because she just disappeared into obscurity. And I think she died in relative poverty, which of course, is a bit sad. But it's nice that the so-called Ryder Waite deck, which was in fact painted entirely by Pamela Coleman Smith, now acknowledges her contribution, which I think is very beautiful. And then we come to Aleister Crowley, who was such a character. I mean, he's a bit like Rasputin, I think, and just a tiny bit like Osho. Although I really shouldn't say so. I mean, he was such a powerful man, and he wanted to eat up life. He was totally into drugs and travel and sex and just everything, and totally into esoteric knowledge. And within a very short time, he had started to create his own religion. I mean, I think he basically wanted to be a messiah. But he never quite got it together, because his religion is such a hodgepodge. Everybody else's religions, it's such a mess. But anyway, just towards the end of his life, I think he must have been 70 or in his late 60s. And this was in the early 1940s, during the war, I think. He wanted to create a tarot deck based on his understanding of the Kabbalah and all kinds of other sources, astrology and all kinds of sources that he was into. And he was fortunate enough to meet a woman called Lady Frieda Harris. And she, not only did she paint the cards, she also kept kept Crowley financially afloat while poor guy had run out of money and run out of friends and just run out of just about everything. Exhausted his body by that time. And anyway, she kept him afloat, and she painted all the cards according to his inspiration. But she painted them all, and it took much longer. I think that took about 5 years. And the Crowley Deck, I mean, the Book of Thoth. And Thoth, by the way, which is the name given to Crowley's deck. Thoth was actually an ancient Egyptian god of wisdom. But in fact, there's no evidence that the tarot decks go back to ancient Egypt. The first tarot decks that we ever heard about in Europe came from Egypt around the 15th century, from Muslim soldiers called Mamluks, who had basically taken over that part of the Middle East at that time. So we got them as a card game. So there's no actual evidence that the ancient Egyptians used the tarot at all. But anyway, it's called the Book of Thoth, and it's called the Aleister Crowley Deck. And it's not called the Crowley Harris deck. It's called the Aleister Crowley deck. But actually, Lady Frieda Harris painted all the cards, and Crowley died before the cards were printed. And Lady Frieda Harris went back to India and died in Srinagar, I believe. And actually, the cards were printed after both of them died. And finally, of course, after the Crowley deck, then I met Osho, and then I was a sannyasin, and then a friend of mine, Padma, Deva Padma, who was a very good artist and also a designer. She designed all the costumes, for example, for the Rajneesh Theatre Company, which I was in. And she, after Osho died, I believe, or maybe just before, it was anyway in the late 80s or early 90s, she designed and painted the cards of the Osho Zen deck. And she also kind of disappeared behind the deck, shall we say. So we have 3 women who painted 3 decks, and none of whom had their names on the front. Just one of those things, I guess. But then Padma, of course, she's a modern woman. She created another deck for her after the Osho Zen deck. And by the way, I love the Osho Zen deck. I think it's a wonderful deck. Very simple and very easy to use, and you know, the message comes through very quickly for me when I'm doing card readings. But then Padma went on to create the Oracle, the Tao Oracle, which is based on the I Ching. Very beautiful deck. Not quite as useful. I mean, I do use it sometimes. I look at those beautiful cards. They are very beautiful cards. But for me, the Osho Zen deck is really the best and the simplest and the most helpful, I think, of all of them. But there we are. That's basically all I wanted to say. Was we have 3 very good tarot card decks, which are in use all over the world, and 3 very talented women whose names now, rightly so, I think, have been acknowledged as the creative contributors to give that expression. That's Pamela Coleman Smith, Lady Frieda Harris, and Deva Padma. Okay, that's it. Bye-bye.